Under the blazing Giza sun, thousands of tourists tilt their heads back, cameras raised, eyes fixed on that perfect triangle of stone cutting into the sky. The Great Pyramid dominates everything. It is the horizon. It is the postcard. It is the monument we are all trained to look up at. But what if we have been looking in the wrong direction? Everyone looks up, but the real secret is down. Beneath the polished limestone blocks, beneath the famous king's chamber and its echoing granite sarcophagus, there is another world carved straight into the living bedrock. A steep, narrow passage drops away from the entrance and keeps going, angling deeper and deeper, until it reaches a rough, unfinished chamber far below the base of the pyramid itself. No golden walls, no hieroglyphs, just raw stone, sharp air, and a silence that feels older than the monument above. Did you know that almost no one is allowed to stand there today? For thousands of years, travelers, priests, and later explorers spoke of hidden spaces under the Great Pyramid. Early explorers crawled down that descending passage with candles and ropes, expecting treasure or royal mummies. What they found instead was this strange, hollowed-out cavity, irregular, unpolished, and, according to the official story, unfinished, as if the builders simply lost interest and walked away. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Why would the most precise stoneworkers in history leave the deepest chamber looking like a quarry pit? Most of us grew up believing that the king's chamber was the ultimate destination, the sacred heart of the Great Pyramid. Guides tell us this is where the pharaoh lay, where the rituals of death and rebirth were completed. But old legends tell a different story. They whisper that the true initiation did not happen in the heights, but in the depths. That the most important chamber might be the one that looks least impressive, hidden far below the shining casing stones where no sunlight has ever reached. According to the stories, this lower region was a gate to the underworld, a stone threshold into the duat, the mysterious realm of the dead and the gods. Some esoteric traditions claim that initiates were led down that passage in darkness, guided only by torches and chants, to face their fears of death and emerge transformed. Modern officials, on the other hand, call it a security risk, a structural oddity, or an irrelevant construction feature. But what if both views are missing something deeper? What kind of place is this, really? An abandoned work site, a symbolic underworld, or part of a forgotten mystery school, hidden in plain sight beneath the world's most famous monument? Welcome back to the channel. Here we explore the mysteries, history, and forgotten lore of ancient Egypt, slowly and calmly, so you can relax, unwind, and drift off while learning about one of the most fascinating civilizations in human history. From the pyramids and hidden chambers beneath the sands to the gods, pharaohs, and ancient stories carved into temple walls along the Nile. If you enjoy relaxing history like this, consider subscribing and joining us for more journeys into the ancient world. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's return to the sands of Egypt. In this episode, we are going to descend step by step from the blazing desert plateau into that forbidden room. We'll weave archaeology, ancient texts, and the lore of secret schools to ask not only what lies under the Great Pyramid, But what kind of human being was meant to walk there? We'll find out together as we begin our journey into the chamber no one can enter. Mythic blueprint, the pyramid as a map of the soul. To descend, we first have to understand what we're walking into. Did you know the Great Pyramid is almost empty on the inside? No painted corridors, no carved reliefs, just a strange geometric spine of passages and chambers hidden behind that smooth northern face. The original entrance is high up on the north side. From there, a tight descending passage angles down at about 26 degrees, cutting straight through the masonry and deep into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. Follow that slope with your mind. The air grows colder, the light disappears. At the end of this stone tunnel lies the so-called subterranean chamber, hacked directly into the living rock, rough, unfinished, and far below the desert floor. Above it, branching away from the same descending passage, an ascending corridor suddenly tilts upward like a break in the underworld route, leading into the heart of the monument. That ascending passage opens into a small horizontal corridor and the so-called Queen's Chamber, set near the center of the pyramid. Above that, the ceiling explodes upward into the Grand Gallery, a long, steep, corbelled hall that feels like the inside of a stone telescope. At the very top, aligned along the same axis, is the King's Chamber, a tight granite room with a single stone coffer and relieving chambers stacked above it like secret attics. Most of us grew up believing this was just clever engineering for a royal tomb, but old legends tell a different story. When you stack these spaces vertically, the rock-cut chamber below, the Queen's Chamber and Grand Gallery in the middle, and the King's Chamber high above, you get something else, a three-level diagram of reality itself. For thousands of years, Egyptian texts spoke of three interlocking worlds: the duat below, the earthly realm in the middle, and the sky of the gods above. According to the stories, the duat was not just a place of the dead. It was an initiatory landscape of trials, gates, and transformations. The middle world was where the heart was tested and purified. The sky was where a successful soul rose as an Ak, a luminous, effective spirit among the stars. Now imagine the pyramid as a stone version of that cosmology. The subterranean chamber is the Duat Gate. The Queen's Chamber and Grand Gallery form the middle school of transformation. The King's Chamber is the stellar throne room, tuned to the heavens. In this view, the pyramid is not a tomb, it is a machine, a ritual laboratory for turning a human king into an Akh. Pharaohs entered as living Horus, embodiments of divine kingship. High priests guarded the secret rites, timing ceremonies with star risings and hidden acoustics. Select scribes copied and recited the forbidden texts that mapped each passage to a stage of the soul's journey. What kind of power does that represent? Not just political power, but mastery over death itself. If the true purpose was to train consciousness to survive the afterlife, then the lowest, darkest, most forgotten chamber suddenly becomes the first initiatory threshold. So why is that underworld room the one place no one can enter today? In the next part of our journey, We'll follow the few who did go down there and what they reported in the dark. Questions in the dark. What was this chamber really for? So why is that underworld room the one place no one can enter today? To even begin to answer, we have to sit with a much simpler, unsettling puzzle. If this was supposed to be the grand burial chamber of Khufu, why does it look like a construction site abandoned in the dark? The floor is hacked straight out of raw bedrock. The walls are rough, unlined, scarred by half-finished cuts. There is no polished granite, no hieroglyphs praising the gods, no sarcophagus set in perfect symmetry. Above, the king's chamber is engineered to near millimetric precision. Below, it feels unfinished. What kind of eternal resting place looks like the builders walked away halfway through? Did you know early explorers like Cavilla and Weiss already noticed this contradiction? They crawled down the descending passage, lanterns flickering, expecting a royal vault, and found a bare pit with a strange, square niche hacked into the floor. If this was abandoned, why leave the rough cavity at all? And if it was not abandoned, then what ritual could require a chamber stripped of all decoration, all comfort, all clues? Then come the logistical questions. Who in the age of the pharaohs was actually allowed down here? Was this a place for crowds, or for a single initiate led by priests in silence? Were they brought at night, blindfolded, their senses already disoriented before the descent even began? And in our own time, why are tourists steered toward the glittering galleries above, while the lowest, oldest chamber remains off the standard path, locked behind grates and official permissions? Most of us grew up believing that if a room is known and mapped, it is simply another attraction. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Modern teams with muon detectors and seismic instruments scan for hidden voids above, yet the space we understand the least may be the one carved deepest into the earth. What secret is being protected when an empty, unfinished room is treated like a security risk? Now, the questions turn symbolic. Why place a chamber not at the heart of the pyramid, but beneath its base, as if pushing consciousness down into the bones of the planet itself? For thousands of years, cultures spoke of the womb of the earth, the cave where heroes die to one world and are reborn to another. According to the stories, the Duat was an underworld you entered by passing through gates beneath the horizon. Was this chamber a literal rehearsal of that descent, a stone diagram of the soul's journey into darkness? Then we have to ask, what happens to the human mind in such a place? Imagine being led down the narrowing passage, the air cooling, the daylight shrinking to a pinprick behind you. At last, the torch is extinguished. No sound but your own breath. No horizon, no sky. Only weight, pressure, and the awareness of millions of tons of stone above. In total darkness, the brain begins to unmoor from ordinary time. Shapes appear behind closed eyes. The boundary between inner vision and outer reality starts to blur. What kind of school would use that as a deliberate training ground? Old legends tell a different story about chambers like this. They speak of initiates lying in stone crypts, entering a controlled, death-like trance, guided by priests chanting in the passages above. If this room was not built for a corpse, but for a living consciousness pushed to the edge, then the most important question rises before us like a hidden gate. What, exactly, were they being prepared to face down there? What region of the afterlife? What encounter with the gods or with their own shadow that ordinary people were never even told existed? And if that curriculum still echoes in the stone, what would happen if someone completed the rite today? We'll find out together when we follow the trail of those who tried and what they reported when the darkness began to speak back. Welcome to the descent, our journey into Egypt's hidden schools. So this is where our descent truly begins. Most of us have seen the Great Pyramid from the outside 1,000 times, on postcards, in documentaries, glowing gold in drone shots at sunset. We know the tourist angles, the crowded Giza plateau, the long lines to the so-called King's Chamber. But how often are we invited to imagine what lies beneath it, not just as empty rock, but as an initiatory path carved into the earth itself? Welcome to Mystery Schools of Egypt, our shared investigation into a different Egypt, where archaeology meets initiation, and where temples and pyramids double as schools for the soul. Here, we follow the stones and the scans, but we also follow the old legends that whisper about hidden chambers, secret rites of death and rebirth, and an ancient knowledge of consciousness that modern science is only beginning to notice. In this episode, we're going to walk a narrow line. On one side, mainstream Egyptology, survey maps, excavation reports, the careful language of unfinished chamber and structural void. On the other, the mystery schools, initiates, lying in stone coffers, rehearsing the afterlife, hearing the gods in the dark. Did you know that beneath the polished geometry of the pyramid, a rough, unlined chamber is hacked straight into the bedrock, far below the base, as if the monument first grew downward into the underworld before it ever reached for the sky? But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. We now have muon tomography, ground-penetrating radar, and micro-robots that can snake through shafts only inches wide. Engineers map anomalies. Officials classify reports. Old legends tell a different story, speaking of forbidden chambers and sealed gates to the Duat. What kind of structure is this, when both priests and particle physicists agree that something hidden is still down there, and neither side is allowed to fully open it? Throughout this journey, we'll move in spirals rather than straight lines. From historical texts, like Herodotus and the pyramid texts, to modern scans that reveal secret voids. From mythic narratives of the soul's descent into the afterlife, to the very practical question, what happens in the human psyche when you're led into darkness, made to confront death, and then brought back into the light? And we won't do it from a distance. We'll descend together into the subterranean chamber, pause in the dark, and listen to the silence, to the echoes, to the way your own breath sounds in a space the ancient builders left deliberately rough. Then we'll climb back out, tracing the ascending passages toward the so-called King's Chamber, carrying a different understanding of what this pyramid was built to do. According to the stories, these were once living diagrams of the invisible worlds. For thousands of years, Initiates used them as maps of inner terrain, so stay with us to the end of this episode, when we'll weave the archaeology, the myths, and the scans into a single picture, a way of seeing the Great Pyramid not as a dead monument to someone else's glory, but as a living diagram you can apply to your own inner work, your own journey through darkness and return to the day. Because the stone may be silent, but the pattern it holds is not finished speaking. Tombs or temples, the official story meets the hidden one. So let's bring the two competing stories into the same stone. Most of us grew up believing the Great Pyramid was exactly what our textbooks called it, a tomb. In the standard Egyptology narrative, Khufu orders a colossal monument for his body and his journey into the afterlife. The narrow passages become processional routes. The so-called King's Chamber is the final resting place, its granite coffer interpreted as his sarcophagus, its hidden relieving chambers above designed to keep the ceiling from collapsing on the royal mummy and funerary treasures. In this view, every corridor and cavity serves a practical purpose. The Grand Gallery is a structural ramp and support. The Queen's Chamber is a secondary burial option or storage space for equipment. And that rough, echoing hollow far below, the subterranean chamber, is explained as an abandoned attempt at an original burial room, a construction experiment cut into the bedrock, or even a pressure relief feature, an architectural leftover beneath the finished design. Did you know that early explorers described it in exactly those terms? They saw the jagged walls, the unfinished floor pit, the lack of decoration, and concluded they simply stopped using it. No sarcophagus, no inscriptions, no golden mask of a god king, just raw stone and silence. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. For thousands of years, old legends tell a different story about what pyramids were for. According to the stories preserved in Hermetic texts, Arabic chronicles, and later esoteric schools, the Great Pyramid was never primarily a tomb. It was a temple of initiation, a stone textbook of the mystery schools, where chosen souls rehearsed death and rebirth while still alive. Seen through that lens, the architecture itself becomes a ritual script. The visible, tourist-filled passages are the outer story of death, the ascending corridors, the grand gallery, the high chambers where the pharaoh's official afterlife is displayed. But below all of that, cut into the living rock, waits a different level of meaning. What kind of place is this lower room, if not a grave? Why is the deepest chamber also the most stripped of all symbols? Esoteric traditions answer because it was meant to erase the outer world, a deliberate void. Imagine being led down that long, narrowing shaft, the air cooling, the light fading, until you are sealed in a chamber with no carvings, no color, no distraction, just darkness, stone, and your own heartbeat. To the orthodox eye, it looks unfinished. To an initiation school, it is perfect. An engineered womb of the underworld, a sensory deprivation chamber for ritual burial, trance, and the guided journey through the duat. So is this leftover room a construction mistake, or the core of the whole design? In the next part, We'll follow the clues from other Egyptian temples and texts to see how this hidden space might have been used and why no one is allowed to enter it now. Those who were allowed below: pharaohs, priests, and the few. To understand why this forbidden chamber matters, we have to ask a simple question. Who would have been allowed down there in the first place? Not tourists, not workers, not even most priests. Only a microscopic elite could cross that threshold. The pharaoh himself, a handful of high priests from the House of Life, and, according to the stories, a very small circle of initiates and scribes bound by terrifying oaths of secrecy. Break the vow. Lose not just your life, but your place in the afterlife. Most of us grew up believing temples were public stages of religion. Incense, music, processions in the sunlight. But old legends tell a different story. Behind the outer courts and columns, there was a second curriculum, a hidden school. Public rituals fed the gods of Egypt. The inner rites trained a few human beings to become like the gods. Did you know the Egyptians even used different architecture for these two worlds? Above, open courtyards and carved reliefs anyone could see. Below, tight corridors, sealed doorways, and chambers hacked straight into the bedrock, like the subterranean room under the Great Pyramid. What kind of lesson needs to be taught in the dark, with no witnesses? Imagine you are one of those initiates. You leave the bright desert behind and step into the descending passage. The ceiling presses low. The floor tilts down at a relentless angle. With every step, the light from the entrance shrinks until it is only a memory behind you. The air cools sharply. Your skin prickles. Sound changes. The noise of the world above becomes a dull, muffled hush, as if the stone itself is swallowing every echo. You smell raw limestone, dust, the faint mineral tang of water seeping somewhere deep in the rock. Oil lamps or flickering torches throw unstable light ahead of you. Shadows stretch and twist across the rough walls, turning simple tool marks into faces, serpents, guardians. This is not ordinary education. This is controlled terror. The priests guiding you know exactly what they are doing. They are using architecture, darkness, and sound to break your attachment to the surface world. For thousands of years, Egyptian texts told initiates what was truly at stake. The goal was not just to be good and hope for a pleasant afterlife. The goal was to stabilize the car, the life force double, to free the bar, the mobile soul bird, to awaken the Ak, the shining effective spirit that could pass through the duat without disintegration and join the imperishable stars. In mythic terms, you were training to become a living star in the body of Osiris, an immortal, radiant being who could move between worlds at will. The subterranean chamber was the first gate of that journey. It was the place where you symbolically died to the sunlight, where you faced the crushing fear of darkness and confinement, and discovered whether your mind would fracture or ignite. Some would emerge reborn, others would never descend that far again. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. If this was only the first threshold, what deeper trials waited beyond it? And why are the modern keepers of the pyramid so determined that no one repeat them now? Whispers from the past, ancient authors, and the hidden curriculum. To answer that, we have to listen to voices that stood much closer to the pyramid than we do. Long before modern Egyptology, ancient authors were already whispering about a hidden curriculum guarded by Egypt's priests. Herodotus, walking these sands in the 5th century BCE, described priests who did more than recite hymns. They were keepers of timelines stretching back tens of thousands of years, guardians of sacred records locked away in temple chambers the public never saw. Only certain initiates were allowed behind the curtains, where the real knowledge of the gods was preserved. A few centuries later, Diodorus Siculus repeated the same theme. He spoke of priests who carried secret books, who learned the mysteries of the stars, of healing, and of rituals that governed the journey after death. To him, Egypt was not just a land of monuments, but a network of living schools, each temple a library and a laboratory for the soul. Did you know that one of the most mysterious sets of texts these authors hint at is the legendary 42 Books of Thoth? According to the stories, these were not random scrolls. They formed a structured sequence: astronomy and the movement of the stars, medicine and the body, sacred music, temple rituals, the weighing of the heart, and finally, the secrets of the gods and the afterlife itself. In other words, a syllabus. Clement of Alexandria, writing in Roman Egypt, even lists these 42 books as if you were reading out course titles. Some were for ordinary temple use. Others, he says, were reserved only for the highest ranks of priests. Most of us grew up believing Egypt's wisdom was scattered and mystical, but old legends tell a different story. They point to a carefully ordered training. This is where the House of Life, the Per-Ankh, enters the picture. These were the hidden scriptoria attached to major temples, where scribes copied and guarded texts on philosophy, magic, healing, and the afterlife. Inscriptions hint that certain writings were not to be seen by the uninitiated. Access was graded. Your spiritual rank determined which shelves you could touch. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. What if the Great Pyramid itself was part of that curriculum? Not just a monument, but a grand stone textbook. Each passage and chamber a chapter. Descent into darkness, confrontation with death, resonance and sound, alignment with stellar pathways. Plutarch, in his writings on Isis and Osiris, suggests that Egyptian myths were veils over deeper teachings. What kind of teaching needs a mountain of stone as its diagram? If that is true, then the subterranean chamber may have been the opening lesson. The first chapter was not written on papyrus at all. It was written into the body and nervous system of the initiate, sealed alone in the bedrock, learning to hold consciousness in absolute dark. No ink, no images, only heartbeat breath and the pressure of the earth. So what happens to a human mind in that chamber, under that much stone, with those exact proportions? In the next part of our journey, we'll find out together. Lasers, muons, and stone. Modern science rediscovers the labyrinth. So what happens to a human mind in that chamber, under that much stone, with those exact proportions? In the next part of our journey, we'll find out together. But first, how do we even know what still lies hidden inside this mountain of limestone? For thousands of years, explorers hacked, blasted, and crawled their way through the Great Pyramid, convinced they had finally mapped its secrets. Most of us grew up believing there were just a few corridors and 3 main rooms, but modern science is quietly telling a different story. Today, instead of chisels and torches, researchers bring particle detectors and lasers. Muon tomography uses tiny particles from cosmic rays raining through the atmosphere and through the pyramid itself to create ghostly X-ray images of stone and void. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses into the bedrock, listening for echoes from hidden chambers. Microgravity surveys weigh the pyramid from the inside, looking for places where the mass is off. And when they find a narrow opening, they send in fiber optic probes and micro-robots, slipping tiny cameras through channels only a few tens of centimeters wide. Did you know one of these projects, called Scan Pyramids, shocked Egyptology in 2017? Their muon detectors picked up a huge, previously unknown void sitting above the Grand Gallery, at least 30 meters long, with a volume comparable to the gallery itself. No entrance has been found, no passage, no staircase, nothing, just a silent, hidden space floating in the core of the monument, like a sealed fort. Other anomalies appeared too: density shifts, strange gaps, hints of further cavities branching around the known passages. Across the Giza plateau, when you add in the tunnels beneath the Sphinx, the workers' galleries, and the buried causeways, you are looking at kilometers of carved rock, shafts that rise at steep angles, corridors abruptly blocked by granite plugs, and air channels so tight a human shoulder could never pass. Some have only been explored a few meters by micro-robots before hitting yet another door. What kind of tomb needs a nervous system like this? Old legends tell a different story. According to the stories, the Duat itself was a labyrinth of gates, guardians, and sudden turns. Now, as we overlay muon maps onto ancient texts, the Great Pyramid begins to look less like a simple burial and more like a multi-level training ground, an architectural simulation of the underworld. Narrow passages force the body into contorted positions. Sudden drops echo the pits and lakes of fire described in the Book of the Dead. Hidden chambers wait like checkpoints on a spiritual journey. Modern neuroscience recognizes that controlled stress, darkness, and sensory extremes can rewire perception, pushing the brain into altered states. So what happens when a civilization obsessed with the afterlife builds those conditions into stone on a monumental scale, when every turn of the labyrinth is a ritual script and every pressure on the body is a lesson in death and rebirth? If the pyramid is a school, then these newly revealed voids are classrooms we have not yet entered. The question is, who or what still guards the final exam? The chamber no one enters, modern barriers, ancient echoes. If the subterranean chamber is the final exam, then here is the twist. In our time, almost no one is allowed to sit for it. Did you know that beneath the polished tourist paths and polished narratives, there is an entire level of the Great Pyramid that most of us will never see? The official story sounds reasonable at first. The descending passage is steep and narrow. The air can turn hot and heavy. If someone panics, slips, or falls ill, evacuating them from that rock-cut throat deep under millions of tons of stone is a nightmare scenario. Engineers point to structural stability. Every vibration, every extra group of feet adds stress to a monument that has already survived for thousands of years. Conservation teams warn about humidity and breath. One tour group can raise moisture levels enough to condense on ancient surfaces, feeding salt blooms and microorganisms. So the logic goes, if we open the lower passages to crowds, we accelerate the pyramid's slow decay. On paper, that sounds like responsible guardianship. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Early explorers like Giovanni Battista Caviglia and Colonel Howard Weiss crawled down those same shafts with candlelight, simple ropes, and hand-drawn maps. They stood in the rough, unlined, subterranean chamber, sketched its jagged ceiling and enigmatic pit, and then climbed back out to tell the world what they had seen. Today we have helmets, respirators, laser scanners, fiber optic cables, and robots that can inch through spaces no human body could endure. Yet access to the lowest chamber is more controlled than ever. What kind of mystery becomes harder to reach as our technology improves? Modern teams have scanned the pyramid with muon detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and ultra-precise 3D mapping. We are told of anomalies, voids, and previously unknown structures. We are shown selective visuals, a color gradient here, a wireframe tunnel there, but the full data sets, the raw scans, the complete 3D models of the subterranean region, live on secure servers, behind institutional walls. Most of us grew up believing that secrets in the ancient world were guarded by priests in leopard skins, whispering forbidden names of the gods. But old legends tell a different story that suddenly feels very current. In the House of Life, only initiates could read the hidden texts. Only the purified could cross certain thresholds. Knowledge was filtered, staged, and timed. Now, the gatekeepers wear hard hats and hold research grants. They decide who descends, who measures, who publishes. According to the stories, the ancient mystery schools used darkness, silence, and depth to crack open the soul. Our age uses restricted permits, safety codes, and non-disclosure agreements. So we're left with a haunting symmetry when both the high priests of the past and the officials of the present agree that the lowest realm should be hard to reach. What does that say about the power of this place? If the subterranean chamber is still treated as dangerous territory, psychologically, ritually, or politically, then perhaps its lesson is not finished. And if the lesson is not finished, what happens when someone finally breaks the pattern and goes all the way down? Abydos, Osiris, and the new clues from the underworld temples. To answer that, we have to leave Giza for a moment and follow the trail to a place the ancients called the Doorway of Osiris. In the mid-2020s, Teams at Abydos, far up the Nile, began peeling back the desert around one of Egypt's most sacred sites. Did you know Abydos was revered for thousands of years as the cult center of Osiris, lord of the underworld and judge of the dead? Most of us grew up believing it was just a necropolis of kings and courtiers, but old legends tell a different story. According to the stories, Abydos was where the severed head of Osiris was buried, a secret relic anchoring the god of death to the earth. Pilgrims walked for days to reach this place. They carried small offering stelae, carved with prayers begging to join Osiris in his rebirth, not just to avoid annihilation in the afterlife, but to awaken while still alive. Recent excavations have revealed why this desert city felt like a portal. Beneath the sand, archaeologists have uncovered new underground structures tied to the great Osiris temple complex. Long rock-cut shafts, side chambers, and what look like processional routes descending into the bedrock. These are not simple tomb pits. The passages bend and narrow, then open into ritual spaces where walls bear traces of paint and carved niches for sacred objects. Imagine a line of initiates moving in darkness, guided only by oil lamps and chants. They descend a sloping corridor, turn sharply, then emerge into a low, hidden chamber designed not for comfort, but for confrontation with fear, with silence, with the gods themselves. What kind of burial needs a choreography like that? But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Among the newly studied complexes is a vast subterranean monument, often called the Osirian, long thought to be just a symbolic tomb. Yet the mid-2020s work around it and adjacent shafts suggests a network, water-filled trenches, island-like platforms, and corridors aligned to funnel processions through staged darkness into pools of reflected light. It looks less like a grave and more like a theatre of the underworld. These discoveries point to a pattern. Across Egypt, the most sacred sites hide their deepest knowledge below ground. At Abydos, at Saqqara, at Thebes, we see the same language of architecture: hidden chambers, blind turns, sudden drops, and carefully controlled light, all used as tools in a mystery school of death and rebirth. Initiates were not just buried, they were trained to identify with Osiris, to rehearse their own passage through the duat. So what happens when we loop this back to Giza? If Abydos is the grand stage where the drama of Osiris was enacted for the people, then the subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid starts to look like the royal version of the same underworld journey. No painted walls, no public rituals, just pure, concentrated initiation. In that reading, the chamber under Khufu is not an unfinished mistake. It is the missing link, a private Osiris temple carved into the living rock where a king or a chosen few descended alone into the deepest lesson Egypt's schools could offer. And if Giza, Abydos, and the other sites form a single initiatory network, what were they ultimately preparing the soul to do? If this was a school for the soul, we have to ask the uncomfortable question: why hide a school at the bottom of a stone mountain? Why carve a classroom into the bedrock, then bury it in silence? Most of us grew up believing that sacred knowledge is meant to be shared. Priests teach, temples preach, wisdom spreads. But under the Great Pyramid, the pattern is the opposite. The deeper you go, the rougher, narrower, and more hidden the passages become, until you reach that raw, unfinished chamber, cut straight into the earth and sealed off from almost everyone. Did you know this idea of secrecy is not unique to Egypt? In mystery schools, from Greece to India, the highest rituals were never written plainly. They were veiled in symbols, guarded by oaths, and given only to those who had already proven themselves. Why? Because certain practices were believed to be dangerous to an unprepared mind. Imagine descending alone into that subterranean room. No light, no sound, no clear way out, hours or days spent in ritual darkness, confronting your own fear of death. For thousands of years, initiates were warned that such encounters with the underworld could shatter a person who lacked moral discipline, mental focus, or a stable heart. Secrecy, in that sense, was a kind of protection. The hidden chamber became a filter. Only those who had already undergone years of purification, fasting, and ethical training were allowed to face the deepest mystery. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Secrecy did not only protect, it empowered. If a small priestly elite controlled access to maps of the Duat, to the secret names of gods and gatekeepers, to the formulas that opened the way, what kind of leverage would that give them over a population terrified of what comes after death? According to the stories, the right spell spoken at the right gate meant safe passage. The wrong word meant annihilation. To own that knowledge was to own the keys to cosmic survival. A king might rule by armies in daylight, but in the dark corridors beneath his pyramid, another kind of power was at work, the power to promise or withhold a guided journey beyond the grave. And there is a deeper psychological angle, training someone to walk straight into terror without breaking, to lie in a stone sarcophagus or in that rough-cut chamber and experience symbolic death and rebirth, does something irreversible to the human psyche. A person who has rehearsed their own death, who has looked into that abyss and come forth by day, is far harder to control through fear. So we return to our central question in a sharper form. What did they learn down there that was so identity-altering, so potent, that it had to be encoded in architecture and guarded by both stone and silence? What kind of inner transformation was being engineered beneath the world's most visible monument, in its most invisible room? To approach that, we have to look at the actual techniques the ancient texts hint at, the step-by-step training for consciousness itself, mapping the Duat, Egypt's otherworld, as a real place. To understand that training, we have to step into the world the Egyptians were preparing for, not in a vague, cloudy heaven, but in a mapped, structured, terrifyingly precise realm they called the Duat. Did you know that for the ancient Egyptians, death was not an ending at all? It was a shift, a passage from daylight into an enormous hidden landscape beneath and beyond the visible world. Most of us grew up believing the afterlife was symbolic or purely moral, but according to the stories carved on tomb walls and written on papyri, The Duat was as detailed as a physical country, with borders, rivers, gates, and guardians. In the Amduat and the Book of Gates, this other world is drawn almost like a blueprint. We see winding corridors that bend and narrow, caverns that open suddenly into vast halls, and islands floating in a black, subterranean sea. There are rivers of fire and lakes of boiling water. Serpents with multiple heads coil around mounds of sand. Hybrid beings, part human, part animal, part something else, stand in ranks along the path, holding knives, spears, or blazing torches. The Duat is not chaos. It is structured. It is timed. It unfolds in 12 great sections, or hours of the night, through which the sun god Ra travels in his boat. Each hour has its own gate, its own guardians, its own trials. In the first hours, Ra is strong, flanked by gods and protective deities. As he descends, he enters tighter passages, darker caverns, zones where the very stars seem to vanish. Demons with blade hands stand at doorways, demanding names, titles, and secret words. If those words are not known, the consequences are brutal. Some regions of the Duat are described as places where the unprepared soul can be cut into pieces, bound in nets, drowned in darkness, or devoured by serpent gods. Other regions glow with an eerie light, from pits of fire, from burning waters, from the eyes of guardians who never sleep. Imagine that sensory world, the echo of unseen waves, the scrape of stone, the hiss of coiling snakes, the blinding flare of torches in a chamber that feels too small and too deep. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. For thousands of years, priests copied these underworld maps not just on papyri, but onto walls and ceilings of hidden chambers. They turned cosmology into architecture. When you look again at a multi-level pyramid, with its narrow, rising and descending passages, its sudden shifts into cramped spaces, and then high, echoing rooms, its deep, rough-hewn chamber, sunk into the bedrock, it begins to look less like a simple tomb and more like a stone model of that 12-fold journey. What kind of school uses corridors of limestone as pages in a book of the afterlife? If the Duat was real to them, then every step underground was rehearsal. And in the next part, we'll find out together how those rehearsals were carried out and why some chambers had to remain forever sealed. Rules of the underworld game. Those rehearsals only made sense because, to the Egyptians, the underworld was not chaos. It was law. Did you know that in their vision, the Duat was more regulated than any earthly kingdom? Most of us grew up believing the afterlife was a vague cloud of spirits drifting in darkness, but old legends tell a different story. They describe a mapped territory divided into regions and hours, where every gate, every guardian, every stretch of river followed precise rules that even the gods could not ignore. In this hidden landscape, nothing was just symbolic. The soul moved through 12 great hours of the night, each ruled by its own deities, its own trials, its own passwords. At one gate, a crocodile-headed guardian demanded a secret name. At another, a serpent coiled across the path, and only a specific spell, spoken correctly, could force it to uncurl. According to the stories, even the ferryman of the underworld river would refuse you unless you named him, named his boat, and named the very planks from which it was made. This was the terrifying part. Ignorance was lethal. If you did not know the order of the hours, you could arrive too early or too late, missing the bark of Ra as it passed. If you stumbled over a formula, a demon could seize your heart and drag you into a side chamber of torment. Without the right knowledge, your personality could be annihilated, your name erased, your bar trapped in a loop of painful scenes that repeated for thousands of years. The Egyptians called this the second death, to be cut off from the cycle of rebirth, from the rising of Ra and the resurrection of Osiris. To them, this was worse than physical death. It meant never joining the solar bark, never stepping out into the dawn as an Ach, a shining spirit, and so the curriculum of the Duat became a matter of survival. This is where the rules become even more fascinating. These were not just rules for humans. Ra himself, the sun god, was bound to the structure of the Duat. Every night he entered at the western horizon, passed through 12 hours, and emerged in the east. Each hour had to be navigated correctly, with the right allies, the right spells, the right confrontations with serpents like Apophis. If the god missed a step, the sun would not rise. What kind of universe holds its own gods to the same underworld laws as a farmer or a scribe? A universe that behaves like a game with fixed mechanics, not a dream that shifts with your mood. And if that game is so strict, what sense would it make to wait until your last heartbeat to learn the rules? Entering the Duat untrained would be like walking into a stone labyrinth blindfolded, with your name and memory on the line. Suddenly, a dark, echoing chamber beneath a pyramid begins to look very practical, a place to practice dying, to recite passwords in the dark, to simulate the terror of serpents and gates while your body still breathes. But if such a chamber was used as a living gateway to the Duat, how exactly did the initiation work? What did they do to the body, the breath, the senses, to make the underworld feel real long before death arrived? In the next part, we descend into those rites, and into the one chamber no one is allowed to enter, walking the Duat while still alive. The Egyptians did not wait for the body to die before entering the underworld. That is the twist almost no one tells you. For thousands of years, they prepared a select few to walk the Duat while still alive. Most of us grew up believing that the sacred texts painted on tomb walls were like cosmic instruction manuals opened for the first time after death. But old legends tell a different story. According to the stories, these were not bedtime stories for corpses. They were training scripts for the living. Did you know the so-called Book of the Dead was never called that in its own time? The Egyptians knew it as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. It was not a single book, but a shifting collection of spells, hymns, passwords, and precise instructions, a portable map of the afterlife, copied on papyrus scrolls or inscribed on coffins and temple walls. Initiates were expected to internalize this map. Pharaohs, high priests, and chosen adepts studied the lines until they could speak them in the dark without a single mistake. They learned the names of demons, the titles of gatekeepers, the secret phrases that turned spears aside and opened hidden doors in the duat. This was not casual reading. This was survival knowledge. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. These texts were not only read, they were enacted in temple complexes and underground chambers at places like Abydos and Saqqara. Priests staged ritual dramas of death, judgment, and rebirth. The initiate was led through scenes that mirrored the soul's journey, the crossing of waters, the weighing of the heart, the encounter with Osiris, and the 42 assessors. Now bring that vision down into the Great Pyramid's bedrock. Imagine the subterranean chamber, rough-hewn, unfinished, far below the polished galleries above. The air is cold and still. The only light is the faint glow of oil lamps in the passage behind you. In the center, an initiate lies in the pit, wrapped like a corpse, limbs bound, breathing slow. Above, unseen in the darkness of the passage, priests become the gods. One intones the thunderous voice of a guardian at the gate. Another whispers as a serpent of the deep. From the pit, the dead initiate responds with memorized lines from the book of Coming Forth by Day, speaking as a soul newly arrived in the duat, pleading for passage, declaring innocence, naming each hidden portal. Is this theatre not to them? The goal was neurological imprinting, to carve the pathways of the duat into the nervous system until the underworld felt as familiar as the palace corridors. Repeat the judgment scene enough times, and the scales of Ma'at become an inner image. Rehearse the terror of serpents in the dark, and the fear loses its power. So when actual death came, the Egyptians believed the soul would not wander lost. It would recognize the terrain, the voices, the questions. It would remember the secret words first spoken in a stone chamber beneath the pyramid and step forward as if returning to a place it had already walked. But if such rehearsals were real, what kind of forces were they trying to contact in those depths? And why would a single chamber beneath the Great Pyramid be sealed off from all of us today? In the next section, we approach that forbidden threshold. Into the stone, your first night in the subterranean chamber. For thousands of years, people have stood outside the Great Pyramid and wondered what lies inside. Most of us grew up believing it was only a tomb. But old legends tell a different story. They speak of a night when you would not stand at the base looking up, but slip inside and go down. You descend alone, the passage narrowing around your shoulders, the light behind you shrinking to a distant star. The angle is steep, about 26 degrees, so your weight pushes into your knees and the balls of your feet. The limestone under your sandals is slick in places, rough in others, worn by centuries of hidden footsteps. Each movement sends a hollow echo ahead of you, as if the pyramid itself is listening. With every step, the air changes, cooler, denser. Your skin prickles as the temperature drops, a slow exhale from the bedrock. Your own breath becomes loud, a damp rhythm bouncing off the sloping ceiling just inches above your head. The world of wind and sky disappears behind you. In front of you is only stone, darkness and the thin, trembling circle of your lamp. Did you know the lowest chamber of the Great Pyramid is not above ground at all? The descending passage cuts straight into the living rock, deeper and deeper, until the smooth masonry ends and raw, chiseled bedrock begins. According to the stories, this is where the real journey started, not in the polished corridors above, but in the unfinished depths below. You reach the subterranean chamber. The ceiling presses low in places, forcing you to bow whether you wish to or not. The floor is uneven, hacked directly from the bedrock, with a strange pit cut down even further into the darkness. Like a second grave inside the first, you can feel, without seeing, the weight of hundreds of thousands of tons of stone above you, a mountain frozen in perfect alignment with the stars. You have been prepared for this. In the mystery schools of Egypt, this is not a tourist stop. It is a ritual threshold. You are taught lines from the book of coming forth by day, each verse a key for an invisible gate. You were told to lie here as if in your own tomb, to let the chamber become the duat, the underworld of rivers, caverns, and terrifying guardians. Your lamp is extinguished. Darkness is no longer an absence of light. It is a presence. Thick, pressing, your heart pounds so loudly it feels like someone else is in the room. You remember your instructions. Visualize the duat's black waters, the 12 gates, the boat of Ra sliding through night. This is a rehearsal of death and rebirth, a controlled fall into the afterlife while your body still breathes. Then you hear it, faint at first, drifting down the stone throat of the passage above you, a chant. Priests you cannot see, voices layered until they sound less than human and more than human at once. The words twist against the acoustics of the chamber, becoming the growl of gatekeepers, the judgment of ancient gods. They call out questions. Who are you? What is your name in the afterlife? What secret words do you speak to pass the serpent, to cross the lake of fire, to stand before Osiris with a heart lighter than the feather of Ma'at? You must answer from memory. No scroll, no guide, no second chance. In this buried room that no one can enter now, the trial is simple. Speak, and the path opens, or fall silent and be lost in the dark. What kind of knowledge would you need to carry in your soul to face that test? In the next part of our journey, we step back from the darkness and look at the texts themselves, the maps of the duat that trained initiates for nights like this. Gate by gate, surviving the 12 hours of night, those maps of the duat were not just funeral decoration. They were synchronized to the sky itself. As the sun dropped behind the western horizon, the vigil in that forbidden chamber would begin. Hour by hour, as darkness thickened over the desert, you were expected to follow the sun's own hidden journey beneath the earth, passing through the 12 hours of night. Did you know the Egyptians timed their rituals so that what happened in the sky and what happened in the underworld vision were one continuous event? Most of us grew up believing night was simply absence of light, but old legends tell a different story. They describe the sun god Ra sailing through a secret river beneath the world, entering gate after gate, while guardians demons, and serpents tried to halt his rebirth. In the mystery schools, your body lay still in the stone chamber, but your inner sight was trained to climb aboard that solar bark and keep pace. The first hours were a test of precision. In the darkness below the Great Pyramid, you reach an early gate in your mind's eye, a towering portal of stone and fire. A guardian with blazing eyes steps forward, its form shifting between man, jackal, and falcon. It demands your name. It demands the name of the portal itself. According to the stories, if you hesitate, the eyes flare, the figure swells to monstrous size, and the underworld closes in. But you have trained for this. You speak the secret names exactly as written in the book of coming forth by day. The sound of your voice vibrates in the narrow chamber. The acoustics catch it, stretch it, turn it into a low humming resonance. In your inner vision, the guardian's fire cools to gold. The threat dissolves. The gate swings open, and the solar bark glides onward. Then the journey deepens. Somewhere around the middle hours, a greater danger appears. Apophis, the serpent of fire, arch enemy of light. For thousands of years, texts and temple walls showed this colossal serpent trying to coil around the sunboat, jaws wide, ready to swallow the day itself. Here your role is no longer passive. You are not just surviving, you are defending creation. You recite the binding spells, the cutting spells, aligning your breath with the gods who stand at the prow. If your voice falters, if fear cracks your focus, Apophis surges closer. The chamber's silence becomes suffocating. The visions twist into nightmare. This is where the moral and psychological training becomes everything. It was never only about memorizing lines. Your heart must be light. Your intention must stay aligned with Ma'at, truth, balance, rightness, even when exhaustion presses on your chest and the stone ceiling feels inches from your face. If you harbor hidden cruelty, if you secretly crave power over others, the duat mirrors it back as attacking forms. Gate by gate, hour by hour, the challenges intensify. The guardians grow more complex, the questions sharper, the illusions more seductive. But something else is changing too. With each successful passage, your fear loosens its grip, your speech grows steadier, your awareness stretches beyond the cramped chamber into a vast, ordered cosmos. By the time you reach the 12th gate, you are no longer just a frightened human lying in the dark. You are rehearsing the stance of one who can walk through death, awake, who can watch the sun die and be reborn without turning away. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. If these gates were practiced so carefully in secret chambers, what traces of that training are still hidden in the pyramid's design itself? And what happens when modern technology starts to expose those traces? So when early explorers finally crawled all the way down that suffocating passage, past the smooth precision of the upper corridors and into the rock itself, what did they actually find? Not much, according to the official reports. No golden sarcophagus, no painted myths of the gods, no jeweled offerings to light up the underworld. Just rough stone walls, an uneven ceiling, dust and an awkward pit hacked into the floor of the subterranean chamber, as if the workers had simply walked off the job and never returned. Did you know that for thousands of years, people assumed that if a secret room existed under the Great Pyramid, it had to be hiding treasure? When Cavalier and Weiss squeezed into that lowest space in the 1800s, they were disappointed. No inscriptions, no altar, no obvious burial. To a treasure hunter, it looked unfinished. To a tourist, it looks almost empty. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. What if that emptiness is not a failure of the design, but the point of the design? What kind of chamber is carved so deep into the earth, aligned so precisely with the rest of the pyramid, only to be left bare? Most of us grew up believing that a room is important because of what objects it contains. Yet, the subterranean chamber seems to reverse that rule. Its content is not gold or granite statues. Its content is what happens to you inside it. The darkness, the weight of the rock, the silence pressing on your eardrums until you can hear your own heartbeat like a drum of the underworld. According to the stories of the mystery schools, the deepest initiations were not about seeing impressive relics. They were about seeing what remained of your own awareness when every outer support was stripped away. In that rough, unadorned space, the initiate met a different kind of treasure, the realization that consciousness could remain awake in the face of fear, in the presence of symbolic death. Imagine lying alone in that pit, the entrance passage sealed, no torch, no guide, no way to measure time. Your mind races. Your body shakes. Then something else appears. A thin, unwavering axis of attention that does not collapse with the light, does not vanish with the comfort of the world above. That axis is what was found there again and again. Old legends tell a different story than the archaeology reports. They say the true promise of these ancient schools was not immortality of the body, but continuity of consciousness, an inner thread that could pass through the gates of the duat and return. Death becomes a doorway, not a wall. So perhaps the most important discoveries in the subterranean chamber were never meant to be dug up and catalogued. They were meant to be carried out in the nervous systems, dreams, and memories of those who climbed back up that tunnel alive. But if the room itself is the instrument, how exactly did the pyramid play the human mind? And what traces of that hidden technology can we still detect today? The pyramid as a mirror. What this means for us now. If the room itself is the instrument, then the pyramid is not just a monument at all. It is a model, a mirror. We began in that forbidden hollow under millions of tons of stone. A rough, unfinished chamber carved straight into the bedrock, officially declared insignificant, practically sealed off from the world. From there we followed a trail through ancient texts and modern scans, through Herodotus and muon tomography, through the Book of the Dead and those strange maps of the duat with their gates, guardians and trials. Step by step, the picture shifted from burial to training, from tomb to living initiation. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Did you know that this same pattern is hiding in us? The Great Pyramid can be read as a vast stone reflection of a single human being, On the outside, a clean, geometric shape everyone can see, measure, photograph. That is our public self, the version we perform at work, on social media, at family dinners. Smooth, controlled, predictable. Inside, the corridors twist. Narrow, steep, sometimes forcing you to crouch or climb. These are the inner passages of thought, memory, and belief that only some of us ever explore with any depth. Meditation, therapy, intense study, nights of crisis that crack us open. These are like the ascending and descending shafts, the hidden galleries, the secret ramps of our own consciousness. And then there is that deep, dark, unfinished chamber in the rock. Most of us grew up believing that places like this, inside or outside, should be avoided. Stay in the light, stay on the polished floors. But old legends tell a different story. According to the stories, the underworld was not simply a prison of terror. It was a testing ground, a school for the soul. We no longer lie in stone coffins under royal supervision while priests chant the names of ancient gods around us. But we still descend. We descend into grief when someone we love dies. We descend into the underworld of our own mind during depression, burnout, or a life crisis that strips away our old identity. What kind of duat is that? A psychological one, a spiritual one, a season of darkness that demands courage, knowledge, and inner alignment if we are to come back changed rather than broken. For thousands of years, mystery schools like those of Egypt treated death and fear not as enemies to be denied, but as gates that could be prepared for, rehearsed, even through ritual, sound, and guided ordeal. Studying these ancient architectures invites us to ask, what if our fear of death, of loss, of the unknown, is not a wall, but a doorway? What if the chamber we are avoiding is precisely where the next level of our own being waits? So if the subterranean chamber was a school for the soul, where is your equivalent today? Is it a meditation practice that scares you with its silence? A therapist's office where old memories surface like buried stones? A community, a teaching, a discipline that asks you to face your own shadows instead of outrunning them? We'll find out together in a moment how the pyramid's hidden technology of sound and stone might point to very practical ways of preparing for our own crossings without ever setting foot in Giza. Standing at the entrance, your next step into the mystery. So as we come back up from that darkness, let's pause at the threshold. Most of us grew up believing that the Great Pyramid's power was in the polished chambers above, the so-called King's Chamber, the glittering apex that once caught the sun. But old legends tell a different story. They whisper that the true heart of this monument is not the finished room in the sky of stone, but the rough, forbidden hollow in the bedrock below. Down there, in that unfinished-looking space no one is allowed to enter today, almost nothing was left behind. No gold, no sarcophagus, no carved prayers to the gods. And yet, according to the stories, this was the place where a person's consciousness was retuned, where the initiate rehearsed death and rebirth inside a living model of the underworld. The chamber was not built to hold objects. It was built to hold a state of mind, Did you know that for thousands of years, people have crawled, mapped, and measured these passages, and still walked away with more questions than answers? We cannot yet prove every detail of those initiation rites. We cannot yet open every sealed void above the Grand Gallery or beneath the base, but here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. The texts, the architecture, the acoustics, and even modern physics asking us to treat these places as schools of the afterlife, not just royal tombs. So where does that leave us, standing here together at the entrance? It leaves us on a shared journey. You have just descended, symbolically, into the lowest chamber of the most famous pyramid on Earth, and returned. Thank you for walking that path with us, for letting these hidden corridors echo inside your own memories of fear, surrender, and quiet transformation. What kind of underworld moments have you already passed through in your own life? Times when an old self had to die so a new one could emerge? If you want to keep exploring these secret schools of Egypt, temples that sing at certain frequencies, tombs that read like training manuals for the duat, forgotten corridors beneath Saqqara and Abydos, this is only the beginning. Subscribe, like, or share this episode if you feel called to go deeper, and tell us in the comments about your questions, your theories, or your own encounters with that inner descent and return, because the Great Pyramid is not finished with its revelations yet. Above the Grand Gallery, muon scans have hinted at another hidden space, a sealed void suspended in the stone, like a thought held in the mind of the monument. Was this a kind of graduation chamber reserved for those who survived the trials below? A final test in the sky to mirror the first in the underworld? In our next journey, we'll find out together what might be waiting in that silent room of air, high above the passage you now know lies far beneath your feet.